Crest Hill Bank was the kind of place where silence was polished into the marble, and the air smelled faintly of cologne, crisp paper, and quiet wealth. Behind every counter was a clean-cut employee in a pressed uniform, smiling just wide enough to say, "Welcome," without ever really meaning it. The line moved with clockwork rhythm. People checked their watches, scrolled on their phones, moved forward, and moved on, until she walked in. Nia Bennett was 12 years old, a small girl with steady eyes and tightly braided hair, dressed in her Sunday best, white blouse tucked neatly into a navy-pleated skirt, a pale cardigan buttoned to the top, and shoes polished so well they caught the morning light. She walked with a confidence not loud, but learned. A kind passed down from a father who taught her to walk tall in rooms that weren't built for her. In her hand, she clutched a long envelope, rigid with a $5,000 scholarship check inside. Not a gift, not luck, earned. Nia had just won a national STEM competition for middle schoolers, beating out students years older with her solar-powered desalination project. The check was the first installment of her early college readiness fund. This was supposed to be a celebration. It was her father, Darius Bennett, who had encouraged her to come alone. "You're ready," he told her. "Own your moment." He'd signed the deposit slip with a proud smile. She had rehearsed everything, the words, the posture, the smile. But Crest Hill Bank wasn't expecting her. The moment Evan Monroe, the teller, saw her approach the counter, the warmth left his expression. He glanced at the check, then at Nia, then back again, his eyes narrowing in subtle disbelief. "You here alone?" he asked, tone flat. "Yes, sir. I'm here to deposit this into my account." He held up the check like it was radioactive. "This real?" Nia nodded. "It's from the National STEM Foundation. I have the letter, too." He didn't ask for the letter. Instead, he waved over a colleague, muttering something about a suspicious endorsement. Nia stood there, cheeks burning, as people in line behind her started to shift impatiently. One woman whispered loud enough for Nia to hear, "She probably found it." 5 minutes later, Teresa Langley, the branch manager, emerged from her office. Impeccably dressed, chin slightly raised, she didn't acknowledge Nia directly. She spoke to Evan, looked at the check, then gave a tight nod. "We're putting a hold on this, and we need to verify identity. Escort her to the consultation room," she said. Calvin, the security guard, appeared moments later and gestured for Nia to follow. She did, quietly, confused, and still holding the envelope. The door shut behind her with a muted click. She wasn't crying. She opened her backpack and took out a leather-bound journal, the one her father gave her, with the words, "Document everything. Words are power." And so she began to write. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that the quiet girl they dismissed had already started the clock on something much, much bigger. If this moment made your heart ache or your fist clench, don't look away. This story is just getting started. Comment the number 7 if you believe every child deserves respect, no matter what they look like or how young they are. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the truth unfolding in the next chapter. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. The quietest voices often carry the biggest truths. The consultation room at Crest Hill Bank was small but tidy, glass walls, sleek gray furniture, and the faint hum of a ceiling vent that never quite made the room comfortable. Nia Bennett sat on one side of the table, her back straight, hands folded neatly on top of her father's leather journal. Her check still sat untouched before her, now paper-clipped to a photocopy of her student ID and the award letter from the National STEM Foundation. Across from her sat Teresa Langley, branch manager. Teresa smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the kind of smile that corporate professionals use when they're preparing to say no in a dozen different ways. Her voice was even, her posture polished. To anyone peeking in from the hallway, the scene might have looked like customer service excellence. But inside that room, skepticism wrapped itself in civility, and Nia could feel it pressing down on her like the weight of a closed door. "We just want to make sure everything checks out," Teresa said with a tone as smooth as glass. "You understand, don't you, sweetie?" Nia didn't answer. She had long learned that sweetie was rarely sweet. Teresa picked up the scholarship check again, squinting at it as if the paper might confess to forgery. "This is quite a sum for someone your age," she added with a chuckle. "Did you fill this out yourself?" "No, ma'am," Nia replied quietly. It was issued directly by the foundation. I was awarded first place nationally. Teresa nodded slowly, lips pursed as though processing something implausible. And you say this STEM Foundation? They mailed it directly to your home? Nia pointed to the letter. Yes, ma'am. That's the original envelope. It has the foundation's return address and my award details. Teresa read it, then reread it, then sighed. Not because of confusion, but because the facts weren't aligning with her expectations. Look, Nia, she said, leaning forward in what was clearly meant to appear maternal. You have to understand, we see a lot of fraud here. Identity theft, scam checks, especially involving young people who don't always understand what they're carrying. Sometimes adults use children to cash fraudulent checks, so we have to be careful. But I earned this, Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Teresa tilted her head, eyes softening just a notch. And that's what we're going to figure out, okay? It wasn't a question. Behind that smile was doubt laced with superiority. Behind that warm tone was an unspoken conclusion. You don't belong here with this kind of money. And behind that polished appearance was a refusal to believe that a 12-year-old black girl could walk into a bank holding something she had earned, without a scheme hiding behind it. The door opened briefly and Evan Monroe poked his head in. We're checking with the issuing institution, he said, just making sure it's not a printed home job. Teresa nodded, then turned back to Nia. These things just take time. Nia looked down at her journal, then back up at Teresa. She wanted to ask, if I were a blonde girl in a private school uniform, would we still be having this conversation? But she didn't. Instead, she wrote a single line in her journal. They doubt what they don't expect to see. In that room full of polite language and business decorum, the most dangerous thing wasn't hostility, it was the denial disguised as due diligence. And the longer Nia sat there, the more she understood. This wasn't about a check. It was about control. The room was growing colder. The longer Nia Bennett sat there, the more sterile everything began to feel. The humming air vent, the buzz of fluorescent lighting, the way the glass walls blurred the world just outside her reach. Time didn't move normally in that consultation room. It bent and stretched around the weight of what was unspoken, that a 12-year-old black girl was being quietly detained, without charge, without explanation, and most of all, without cause. Teresa Langley stood by the door now, arms crossed, pretending to check her tablet. Evan Monroe hovered nearby with a folder of printouts he hadn't even looked at. No one had called Nia's father. No one had offered her water. And no one seemed in a hurry to resolve what they continued to call a verification issue. A quiet but unmistakable message hung in the air. You may leave when we say so, not a second before. Nia said nothing. Inside, she was fighting a quiet battle against rising panic. Not the screaming kind, not the kind that begs or yells or breaks down, but the kind that clenches your jaw, grips the edge of your seat, and whispers, "Stay composed. They want you to crack." Instead, she opened her father's journal, turned to a fresh page, and began writing. 10:48 a.m. They still haven't called Dad. She sketched the layout of the room, noted the name on Teresa's name tag, jotted down Evan's question about the check being fake. She wrote it all, not for herself, but for whoever would one day need to read it, because someone would. The door clicked again. This time it wasn't Evan or Teresa. It was Calvin, the security guard. Big, silent, and uncomfortable. He entered without meeting Nia's eyes and stood in the corner like a sentry. Teresa looked up and spoke with the kind of corporate finality that left no room for argument. Nia, at this time, we're going to need you to remain in this room until we can resolve a few security concerns. We've contacted external authorities to help us verify the authenticity of this transaction. Until then, please stay seated. Nia looked at her, finally meeting her gaze. I haven't done anything wrong, she said steady. No one's saying you have, Teresa replied with the infuriating calm of someone who fully intended to treat her like she had. We just need to do our due diligence. She turned to Calvin. Make sure she doesn't leave. Calvin's jaw tightened. His discomfort was visible, but he nodded. Nia turned her attention back to the journal. 11:02 a.m. I'm not allowed to leave. I haven't cried. I won't. From her chair, she could still see the edge of the hallway through the frosted glass. Customers came and went. Laughter floated from the main lobby where people were being served. Some were depositing large checks. Some were dressed in casual clothes. Some looked much younger than the power they carried in their accounts. But no one stopped. No one asked why a child was being guarded behind glass like a threat. And that, perhaps, was the most painful part. Not being doubted, but being invisible. As if her presence only became a problem when it didn't match someone's idea of who gets to hold a future in their hands. And the worst part? She wasn't surprised. She had hoped it wouldn't happen. But she had been prepared, because her father had told her, on the day she won the scholarship, that there would be rooms that would try to shrink her, spaces that would doubt her before they knew her name. He hadn't told her what to say. He had told her what to be. Still, clear, unshaken. So that's what she was, detained, but never broken. The walls of the consultation room were glass, but the soundproofing wasn't perfect. At first, Nia Bennett wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She was too busy writing, capturing every detail, timestamps, names, gestures. But as the hallway outside fell quiet and the murmur of voices emerged from the nearby corridor, she lifted her pen and tilted her head ever so slightly. That's when she heard it. "I'm telling you, we can't keep sitting on this. He's expecting the files today," a voice hissed. It was Teresa Langley, the same composed manager who smiled as she ordered Nia to remain detained just minutes earlier, now sounded irritated, anxious, unguarded. A man's voice responded, lower, sharp. "You'll get your bonus when the data clears the firewall, not before. And don't screw this up. You're lucky she walked in when she did. It's bought us time." Silence, then footsteps. Nia froze. They were talking about her. She didn't move, just stared at the journal pretending to write, while her ears strained for more. "I don't like it," Teresa said again. "Too many people saw. If this blows up—" "It won't," the man snapped. "It's a child. She doesn't know what she's holding. Just keep the deposit frozen, delay her, and keep your team quiet." Nia's heart beat like a drum in her chest. A chill ran down her arms. She recognized the voice now. She'd heard it once, briefly, during a TV interview her father made her watch. Victor Hastings, the CEO of Neocore Financial, a rising tech conglomerate and a direct competitor to her father's firm. What was he doing at Crest Hill Bank? And why was he talking to Teresa? Nia slowly reached for her backpack and unzipped the front pocket. She slid the journal inside, careful not to rattle anything. Her mind raced, not in panic, but with calculation. Her father had trained her to observe, to record, to understand before acting. What she was hearing wasn't about her check anymore. It was about something bigger, a data breach, a leak, something illegal. And her presence had accidentally become a stalling tactic, a child held quietly while grown-ups moved secrets behind closed doors. "Did you at least wipe the system after uploading the folder?" Teresa asked nervously. Victor scoffed. "I don't need babysitting. Just make sure no one finds out what that account is tied to. Especially not anyone from Brooks Security." Brooks Security, Nia's father's company. The breath caught in her throat. Now she knew why Victor Hastings was here. Why Teresa had turned cold the moment she saw Nia's name. Why her presence had triggered fear, not suspicion. Because Nia wasn't just a child with a check. They thought she was leverage, a delay, a distraction, and they had no idea who she really was. Nia leaned back in her chair, careful to keep her expression neutral as footsteps passed by the door. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap, not because she was afraid, but because she knew something they didn't. She wasn't just recording a bias anymore. She was holding evidence. The truth was no longer whispered in boardrooms or buried in data logs. It had just walked into the wrong bank, wearing a cardigan, holding a check, and writing in a journal her father gave her. And she wasn't leaving without it. The door cracked open with a soft creak. For a second, Nia Bennett braced herself, expecting another cold stare or another round of veiled suspicion. But it wasn't Teresa. It wasn't Evan. It wasn't even Calvin, the uneasy security guard. Instead, a young woman stepped halfway inside, holding a clipboard and wearing a badge that read, "Jasmine Ward, customer service liaison. Her steps were quiet, unsure. Her brows pinched together as her eyes scanned the room, then rested gently on Nia. "Hey," Jasmine said softly. "You doing okay in here?" Nia didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure what this was. Another trick? A performance? But Jasmine stepped fully inside and closed the door behind her. Her posture was different. Not stiff like the others. Not fake sweet or smug. She looked conflicted. Human. "I brought you some water," she said, setting a bottle on the table. "They should have offered it earlier. They didn't." Still cautious, Nia gave a polite, "Thank you," her voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine sat down across from her, lowering her voice. "Look, I know you're probably scared, and I know this feels wrong, because it is." That got Nia's attention. Jasmine glanced over her shoulder at the glass wall, then leaned in. "I heard what Teresa said, about you, about the hold. It's not protocol. She's stalling." Nia stayed silent, watching. "I don't know exactly what's going on," Jasmine admitted, "but I know she took someone into her office this morning and locked the door. And I know she's hiding something. And now you're sitting here, being treated like a criminal over a legitimate check?" Jasmine's voice shook slightly, not from fear, but from anger. Nia slowly reached into her bag and pulled out her journal. She opened it to the most recent page and turned it around so Jasmine could read. The writing was small, detailed, and precise. Jasmine's eyes scanned the page and widened. "You heard this?" she whispered. Nia nodded. "And you wrote it down?" Another nod. Jasmine looked at her with a new expression. Not pity, not sympathy. Respect. She sat back, exhaling. Okay, listen. I've only been here 6 months. I got this job straight out of college, and I was excited to make a difference. But I've already seen enough to know that Teresa has her own rules. She protects people like Evan, overlooks complaints, and now this?" She paused, then added quietly, "You're not the first person she's tried to silence." Nia's eyes flicked up. "Who was?" Jasmine hesitated, then leaned forward again. "A woman came in last month with documents about a mortgage error. Teresa shredded them, told her it was resolved. I overheard part of the phone call later. She called Hastings. Same guy you wrote about. I didn't understand it then. I do now." The pieces were fitting together. "What are you going to do?" Nia asked. Jasmine looked at her, then at the journal. Her jaw clenched. "I'm going to help you," she said. "First, I'm going to get you out of this room, quietly. Then we're going to contact someone who can shut this whole thing down." "But they'll come after you," Nia whispered. "Let them," Jasmine said, fire flashing in her voice. "I'd rather lose a job than lose myself." She stood and looked toward the door. "When I open this, stay close. Don't speak. Let me handle it." And with that, the smallest shift in power took place. A 12-year-old girl and a junior bank employee, two people dismissed by the system, had just become a threat. Not because they were loud, but because they were right and they had each other. As Jasmine reached for the door handle, Nia quietly slipped the journal back into her bag. Her fingers shook, but not from fear. For the first time that day, she felt hope. If you felt the weight of this moment, don't miss what comes next, because the truth hasn't finished speaking. Comment the number 7 if you believe courage doesn't require a title, only a decision. Comment 0 if you think this situation has gone too far. Your voice matters. Subscribe to our channel for the next shocking revelations in this true-to-life story. Share this video so others can witness what happens when unlikely allies choose to stand together. The automatic doors of Crest Hill Bank opened with a soft hiss, but the presence that stepped through them was anything but quiet. Darius Bennett walked in with calm precision, pressed charcoal suit, gold-rimmed glasses, a leather messenger bag slung across his shoulder. His movements were slow, deliberate, but the room responded to him like gravity itself had just shifted. Heads turned, voices quieted, and for a moment, even the light seemed to lean his way. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. He crossed the marble lobby in long, steady strides, his eyes scanning every face without flinching. Behind the front desk, Evan Monroe noticed him first and instinctively straightened his collar. Then Teresa Langley looked up from her office, froze mid-sentence, and stood as if pulled upright by an unseen string. Darius's voice cut through the lobby with controlled force. "Where is my daughter?" The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Teresa approached, a too smooth smile forming on her lips. "Mr. Bennett, I assure you there's no need to worry. Nia is perfectly safe. We're just conducting standard check verification." "Your standards don't include detaining minors without parental contact," Darius interrupted, still not raising his voice. He reached into his bag, pulling out a black folder with federal markings. "You may not recognize me, but your IT department will. I designed your encryption protocols. I know your internal firewall, and I'm well aware that your cameras and email servers have been compromised. By you." Teresa's face paled, the artificial charm draining from her expression. "I wasn't supposed to be here today," he continued, "but your decision to unlawfully hold my daughter gave me enough legal ground to escalate an open investigation. So I came early." Behind him, two suited individuals entered the bank. One carried a badge, the other carried a tablet. The FBI logo flickered briefly as they approached the front desk. Evan backed away. "I suggest," Darius said, his tone cool as glass, "you take your hands off whatever you're hiding because it's no longer yours to manage." Teresa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her breath caught. Then, as if the moment had waited for a cue, Jasmine Ward stepped into the lobby with Nia beside her. The young girl walked slowly, journal clutched tight, expression unreadable, but her steps didn't falter. The silence in the room deepened as father and daughter locked eyes. Darius exhaled, soft but relieved. "You okay, baby?" Nia nodded. "I wrote it all down." The agent beside Darius stepped forward. "Sir, would you like us to begin collecting statements?" Teresa tried to speak again, voice shaking. I was only doing my job. There were questions about the check." "And yet," Darius said calmly, "you never called the issuing organization, or the guardian, or anyone but your contact at Neocore Financial. We traced the metadata on the files you sent this morning. They're already archived as evidence." He turned to Nia, knelt slightly so they were eye to eye. "You did everything right," he said gently. "They underestimated you. They always do." Nia looked up steady. "They didn't know who I was." "No," Darius agreed, "but they do now." And just like that, the room shifted. It wasn't about a check anymore. It wasn't about protocol. It wasn't even about the girl they thought they could push aside. It was about the truth, and the moment it walked in wearing confidence, carrying receipts, and demanding accountability. And the man who brought it? He wasn't just a father. He was the storm they didn't see coming. The tension in the bank lobby had shifted. It wasn't panic yet, but it was close. Eyes darted. Phones were slipped quietly into pockets. Whispers died mid-sentence. What had begun as a routine verification had now transformed into a federal investigation, and everyone could feel it. Darius Bennett didn't posture. He didn't raise his voice or puff his chest. He simply opened his black folder and handed a USB drive to the federal agent standing beside him. "Start with this," he said. "Encrypted packet, metadata chain verified, time-stamped recordings, internal chat logs, and firewall breaches originating from this branch." The agent nodded, plugging the drive into his tablet. Within seconds, the screen lit up with logs and audio files. Then came the video. Teresa Langley's voice crackled through the speakers, clear as glass. "Just delay her. She's a kid. Stall while we finish uploading the last of the archive." Another file, a screen grab of an email sent that morning. Subject line, "Transfer to Hastings." Attached, internal client data, proprietary account structures, and access credentials from Crest Hill's private portfolio. Evidence of a data breach, corporate betrayal, and federal wire fraud. The room felt like it tilted. Teresa, who had once owned the floor in heels and quiet authority, now looked hollow. Her face was drained of color, her hands twitching by her sides as though unsure whether to plead or run. "You don't understand. Hastings said it was just a backup copy. I didn't know." "You knew," Darius interrupted, voice steady. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You targeted my daughter not because of the check, but because her name was familiar, because she was a threat to your delay. You used a child to stall an investigation." Jasmine Ward stepped forward, her hands visibly shaking, but her voice clear. I can confirm what I saw and heard. She was going to shred the award letter. She was planning to call Child Protective Services. This wasn't about caution, it was about control. The agent nodded. Ms. Langley, please place your hands where I can see them. Teresa tried to step backward, but it was over. In seconds, she was in handcuffs. The room didn't erupt in chaos. It froze. Everyone stared, some in disbelief, some in relief, and some realizing they had stood silently beside wrongdoing for far too long. The second agent stepped outside and returned with 2 more officers. We're securing the server room and pulling the footage. Subpoenas are already being filed against Victor Hastings. He's not out of reach. Nia stood at the center of it all, holding her journal tight to her chest. Her check, once a symbol of her hard work, was now evidence in a federal case. Darius turned to her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. You didn't just defend yourself. You helped expose a system. She looked up, eyes steady. I just wrote it down. But that was the power of it. What she wrote couldn't be denied. Not by polished liars, not by silence, not by the weight of assumed authority. What began with a question, "Are you sure this is your check?" had ended with a revelation. The truth may be quiet, but it watches everything. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't need to raise its voice. It simply opens the file. The silence that followed Teresa Langley's arrest wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that settles after a storm when everyone is still trying to understand what just happened. The woman who only hours earlier controlled the entire branch with confident efficiency now stood handcuffed, escorted out through the same lobby where she once smiled behind glass and power. She didn't look back, but everyone else did. The bank's sleek interior, the tall windows, polished brass counters, quiet fountains, now felt artificial, almost theatrical, as if the entire building had been performing a role alongside its employees, and now the curtains had finally fallen. Behind the front desk, Evan Monroe leaned against a counter, pale and visibly shaken. His attempts to distance himself were immediate, if transparent. I was just doing what I was told, he said to no one in particular. I thought the check looked odd, that's all. But his words had no audience. Customers, staff, and the remaining managers watched him with narrowed eyes. The confidence he once wore like a second skin was gone. All that remained was a man grasping for an exit that wouldn't come. Across the lobby, Jasmine Ward stood beside Nia Bennett, still holding her clipboard, still dressed in the uniform of someone technically junior. But in that moment, everyone could see who had really shown leadership. A regional executive from corporate, summoned after word of the investigation spread, arrived less than an hour later. A tall woman with sharp eyes and clipped speech, she reviewed the early findings, spoke with federal agents, and within minutes made 2 things clear. 1. Crest Hill Bank would fully cooperate with federal investigators. 2. Immediate internal restructuring would begin. Jasmine was pulled aside privately. When she returned, her eyes were wide. They offered me an interim position, she whispered to Nia, compliance and ethics lead, at 24. Nia smiled. You earned it. Jasmine looked down at her, shaking her head. So did you. Meanwhile, the customers who had watched Nia with suspicion earlier, those who scoffed or whispered, now looked at her differently. Some with guilt, some with awe, all with silence, because they had seen something rare. A system crack from the inside out, and a child holding the pen that recorded every fracture. In the conference room once used to interrogate her, Nia's check was returned. Not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a correction of error, backdated, authorized, and fast-tracked for deposit. It was no longer about money, it was about acknowledgement. And as the bank's reputation unraveled in local headlines and national news alerts, it wasn't Teresa Langley's name that trended. It was Nia Bennett. 12-year-old girl exposes bank corruption with her journal. Middle school STEM scholar uncovers federal data breach. The girl who brought her words and brought down the lie. Darius watched his daughter from across the room, standing a little taller than usual, not because she had changed, but because the world had finally caught up with who she already was. The facade didn't fall with screaming or glass breaking. It fell with paper, with facts, with a girl whose voice had never been loud, but whose truth had never needed volume to be undeniable. And as the bank struggled to rebuild its image, Nia simply walked out the same door she'd entered. Only now, no one dared ask if she belonged. By the end of that week, her name was everywhere. Nia Bennett, age 12. Not famous because of a scandal, but because she exposed one. Not because she fought with her fists, but because she stood with her facts. Her quiet determination, her poised silence, and that leather-bound journal became symbols of something larger than just a single incident at a bank. It became a story of a system cracked open by a child no one thought to take seriously. The local paper ran a front-page spread titled "The Girl with the Diary." News anchors used it too, almost like a reverent nickname. Talk shows invited her to speak, book publishers called, and major networks requested interviews. But through it all, Nia stayed exactly as she had always been: composed, private, observant. The journal never left her backpack, and when asked how she felt about the attention, she replied simply, "I just wrote down what happened. That's all." But it wasn't all. What she had done, most adults wouldn't have dared. She had stepped into a space that was never built for her, faced condescension masked as protocol, and responded not with outrage, but with evidence. She didn't just hold her ground. She documented the battlefield, every line, every timestamp, every whispered comment. And in doing so, she exposed not only the individuals behind the wrongdoing, but the culture that enabled it to flourish. At her school, she returned to quiet halls and watchful stares. Teachers who once dismissed her as overly serious now introduced her as our nationally recognized scholar. Classmates who hadn't known her name now wanted to sit beside her. But Nia didn't change to match their newfound respect. She simply remained Nia, the girl who listened, the girl who wrote, the girl who never doubted her own reality, even when the world around her tried to gaslight her into silence. And as for the journal, it would later be donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where it was displayed under a glass case titled "Justice in Her Own Hand." The pages, still crisp, still neat, told a story without needing narration. Visitors stood in front of it for long minutes, some shaking their heads, others tearing up, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so heartbreakingly normal. A black child questioned for holding what she earned. A corporation using bureaucracy to bury misconduct. A girl choosing to respond, not with rage, but with record, and winning. At home, her father Darius remained her greatest source of calm. He didn't bask in the spotlight. He didn't issue press statements. He simply made sure she slept soundly, ate her meals, and stayed grounded. "You're not famous," he'd say. "You're just finally visible." That mattered to Nia, because being seen, truly seen, was all she ever wanted when she walked into Crest Hill Bank that morning. Not to make headlines, not to start a legal case, just to deposit a check she earned. What the world gave her instead was scrutiny, and what she gave back, accountability. She later said in one of the rare interviews she agreed to, "I didn't write to prove anything. I wrote so I wouldn't forget how it felt." And that was the deepest truth of all. Because while systems are slow to change, memory is quick to fade. But a journal remembers exactly. And now the world remembered too. Her story became part of a broader movement. Bank training policies changed. Racial bias seminars adopted her case as a study. Advocacy groups cited her bravery. Young girls wrote to her, sharing their own notebooks. Their own moments of doubt turned to courage. But the legacy wasn't in the headlines. It was in the mirror she held up to a world too quick to judge and too slow to listen. And in that mirror, we all saw the truth. That power doesn't always come from the loudest voice. Sometimes it comes from the quietest pen, held by the smallest hand, in a room no one thought to pay attention to. She walked into that bank a girl with a check. She walked out the girl with the diary. And nothing, not a building, not a system, not even the silence, could erase that again. In a world so quick to judge by appearance, the image of a quiet black girl standing calmly in the reception of a luxurious bank reminds us of something powerful and painfully familiar. She is small in stature but immense in dignity. Across from her stands a woman of status and authority, her finger pointed, her voice raised, her power misused. And behind it all, a man, her father, steps into the frame with eyes full of both rage and resolve. It is more than just a scene, it's a mirror. For many older Americans, especially those who lived through civil rights struggles, segregation, or even quiet decades of unspoken prejudice, this moment echoes deeply. We've seen this before, in offices, in restaurants, in hospitals, and yes, in banks. But what makes this moment so poignant is that the one being accused, demeaned, and diminished is a child. And yet it is that very child who embodies grace, discipline, and moral clarity. The lesson here is both old and urgent. There will always be people who misuse authority, those who confuse position with permission, who believe tone grants them truth. But what this moment teaches us is that dignity does not raise its voice. It does not point fingers. It does not need to justify its presence. Dignity stands tall, even when it is the smallest person in the room. For our senior viewers who have spent a lifetime watching history repeat itself in new clothes, this story should not just stir sorrow, but stir strength. It tells us that even as injustice evolves, so too does courage. Today it wears school uniforms and carries pink backpacks. And sometimes it walks into a bank not to cash a check, but to call the system to account. We often ask, what can we do in the face of such moments? We can witness them fully. We can talk about them honestly. We can teach the young not only what we endured, but how we endured it with our heads held high. And we can remind others that true justice is not always loud. It's often written in a child's quiet refusal to shrink. That girl, Nia, represents every grandchild we hope grows up with the confidence to stand tall and the wisdom to stay calm when the world tells them otherwise. She is the result of generations who paved the road before her. Her strength is not hers alone. It's inherited from the struggles and victories of those who came before. And let us not forget the Father. He is the protector, the shield, the one who walks in not with chaos, but with command. His presence affirms what every parent, every grandparent, every elder must remember. We may not always prevent harm, but we can always show up when it counts, and we must. So as we watch this story unfold, through one image, through one girl, through one moment of confrontation, we must ask ourselves, are we living in a way that upholds truth when it's uncomfortable and dignity when it's ignored? And more importantly, are we preparing the next generation to do the same? If this story moved you, touched something familiar in your own life, or reminded you of why we still speak up, then we invite you to stay connected. Comment the number 7 if you believe that dignity, even in a child, can outshine power. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that honor character, courage, and the quiet strength in all of us. Share this video with someone who still believes that justice belongs to everyone, no matter their age, size, or silence, because sometimes the smallest person in the room holds the greatest truth, and it's time we listen.